You ever feel like you're just scratching the surface of a topic?
Mm.
Like there's this whole uh, fascinating underbelly of knowledge just waiting.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of what we try to do here, isn't it?
Exactly. We take the information that's out there,
Yeah.
the articles, the studies, and we really try to drill down.
Get to the core insights, the stuff that, well, makes you think differently.
Find those hidden levers, maybe. The things that explain why things are the way they are.
Those unexpected connections, yeah. That really transforms how you see things.
And today, we're tackling something that feels, I think, pretty fundamental to how we view success. It's called the Matthew effect.
Ah, right, the Matthew effect. From the Bible, originally.
Yeah, you might remember the basic idea. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, something like that.
Exactly. But it's much broader than just money, especially how we're looking at it today.
So how does it apply here?
Well, for our purposes, the Matthew effect is really about how initial advantages, even really small, seemingly insignificant ones, they can compound. They build up over time.
Like a snowball effect.
Precisely. It's that snowball effect in action. Early success tends to breed more opportunities, and those opportunities then lead to, well, even more success down the line.
Okay. So our mission then, for this deep dive, is to try and uncover these often invisible factors, the things that really drive extraordinary achievement.
Yeah, looking beyond just, talent and hard work, that's the usual story.
Right. We want to get into the deeper, maybe more complex stuff. And to help us, we're leaning pretty heavily on Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers.
It's a great source for exploring exactly these kinds of hidden advantages.
Okay, let's get into it then. Where do we start?
Well, a perfect place to start, I think, is with something that looks like a totally level playing field. Canadian junior hockey.
Okay.
Book about, say, the 2007 Memorial Cup final. It was the Medicine Hat Tigers versus the Vancouver Giants.
Right, Canadian junior hockey. It always feels incredibly meritocratic, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, kids start so young, they move through these very structured leagues, all based on age.
Yeah.
By the time they get to that championship level, you'd assume it's just cute. It's purely about who's the most skilled player.
That's the natural assumption, absolutely. But if you actually looked at the roster, the list of players for the Medicine Hat Tigers that year, something really interesting jumped out.
Okay, what was it?
A really striking pattern. A huge number of their players, 17 out of 25, actually.
17 out of 25, wow.
Yeah, they were born in the first 4 months of the year, January, February, March, or April.
Whoa, okay. That's way more than you'd expect by chance. What's going on there? Is there some, secret advantage to being born in winter?
Hey, not quite. The reason is actually pretty simple, and it has nothing to do with astrology or anything like that.
Okay.
In Canada, the cutoff date for age eligibility in most of these youth hockey leagues is January 1st.
January 1st. Okay, so what does that mean practically?
It means that a player born on, say, January 2nd is in the same age group, playing against kids who might have been born in late December of that same year.
Ah, so they could be almost a full year older than some of their teammates or opponents.
Exactly. And when you're talking about young kids, 8, 9, 10 years old,
Right.
that age difference translates into pretty significant physical advantages.
Yeah, I bet. Size, strength, coordination, all that stuff.
Precisely. So coaches, when they're picking players for the elite teams, the rep teams, often around age 9 or 10, who stands out?
The bigger, more coordinated kids, the ones born earlier in the year.
Usually, yes. And this is where a concept from psychologist Roger Barnsley comes in. He called it selecting, shepherding, and differentiating experience.
Okay, selecting, shepherding, differentiating. Break that down.
Well, first you select the kids who seem to have more potential, often the ones who are just physically more mature because of that birth date advantage.
Right.
Then you shepherd them into the better programs. They get the better coaching, they play with other skilled players.
Ah.
And that leads to a differentiating experience. They get more ice time, play more games, get way more practice.
Ah, so the initial advantage, which might just be being a bit older?
It gets amplified. It leads to a cycle where they actually do become better players because they've had better training and more opportunities.
It's a positive feedback loop, kicked off by something almost arbitrary, like when your birthday falls.
Exactly. And by the time they're teenagers, competing for spots in junior leagues like the Medicine Hat Tigers, they often really are the most skilled players. But that skill wasn't just innate. It was nurtured by this early advantage.
And you said this isn't just a Canadian hockey thing.
Not at all. You see these kinds of birth date skews in lots of other sports. It just depends on what their specific age cutoff date is.
Like what?
We'll take U.S. baseball. The cutoff is often July 31st.
Okay.
So if you look at Major League Baseball rosters, guess which birth month is overrepresented?
Bingo.
Significantly more players born in August compared to July. Gladwell cites a specific year, 2005, I think it was 505 August-born players versus only 313 July-born.
Wow. That's a big difference.
It is. And European football, soccer, shows similar patterns depending on the league's cutoff. In England, back in the 90s, more players were born September to November compared to June through August.
So it follows the school year cutoff, maybe.
Often, yeah. Or specific league rules. Even international youth tournaments, if they have, say, an August 1st cutoff, you tend to see more players born in late summer or early fall.
It's kind of wild when you see it laid out. You mentioned the Czech Republic's under-20 football team from 2007.
Yes, that's a stark example. Overwhelmingly weighted towards players born early in the year. You've got guys like Marcel Gekhoff, born literally January 1st.
January 1st?
Ludek Friedrich, January 3rd. Thomas Peckhardt, late May. Lucas Kuban, June. It's really skewed.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about all the kids born in, say, November or December. Are they just missing out?
That's the implication. Their talent might get overlooked simply because they started slightly behind physically. And this isn't just about sports either.
No. Where else does it show up?
Well, think about academics. Two economists, Bedard and Dewey, looked at international test scores, the TIMSS test, for maths and science.
Okay.
They found that within the same grade level, say fourth grade, the oldest kids consistently scored better than the youngest kids.
How much better?
Significantly better, between 4 and 12 points higher on a scale where the average difference between grades is maybe 30 points. That's a substantial effect in education research.
So just being older within the same grade gives you an academic edge, too.
It seems so. That extra bit of development, maybe maturity, seems to matter quite a bit, especially in those early years.
Which really brings up that question again. Are we accidentally setting kids up to fail, or at least struggle, just because of their birthday?
It certainly looks like we might be overlooking potential. Think about all those kids born in the second half of the year in hockey-crazy Canada.
Yeah, their path is automatically harder.
Gladwell even poses this interesting thought. Maybe a Czech kid born late in the year is disadvantaged in football, right, because of that cutoff.
Right.
But maybe he'd be fine in hockey if the cutoff favored him there. But then you look at the Czech hockey under-20 team from that same year, 2007.
Let me guess.
Same pattern. Also skewed towards early year births. Guys like David Kvitin and Jiri Suchi, both January 3rd. Then you have a few like Tomas Kana in late November, Michel Papik right at the end of December, but the bulk are early.
So you're kind of stuck if you're born late in the year, regardless of the sport in some places.
It really highlights how these seemingly small administrative rules can systematically advantage some and disadvantage others right from the start.
Okay, so birthday gives you this initial, often unseen leg up. But even with that, raw talent alone isn't the whole picture, is it?
No, definitely not. And that brings us to the whole idea of practice, deliberate practice.
Right. You hear stories about athletes, like that player Scott Wasden from the Medicine Hat Tigers.
Yeah.
His dad, Gord, talked about how incredibly hard Scott worked from day one.
Absolutely. That dedication is crucial. Scott was apparently always practicing. But you also have to remember, Scott was born early in the year.
Ah. So he likely got picked for those better teams early on.
Which gave him more opportunities to practice, better coaching, more ice time. So yes, the hard work was essential, but the opportunity to put in that focused work is just as critical. It wasn't just happening in a vacuum.
Which leads us straight into this concept that's become pretty famous now, the 10,000-hour rule.
Exactly, the 10,000-hour rule. Gladwell popularized it, drawing on research by Anders Ericsson.
What's the core idea?
The core idea is that achieving true expertise, like world-class mastery, in pretty much any complex field music, sports, programming, whatever, requires roughly 10,000 hours of deliberate practice.
Deliberate practice. So not just noodling around on the guitar, but focused effort.
Precisely. It's about pushing yourself, working on specific weaknesses, getting feedback, constantly striving to improve, not just mindless repetition.
And 10,000 hours. I mean, that's a lot of time.
It's huge. Think about it. That's like working full-time, 40 hours a week for 5 years, or 20 hours a week for 10 years.
Yeah, okay. That's a massive commitment.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine getting that amount of practice without some serious advantages, right?
Absolutely. It almost always requires significant support, maybe financial backing, access to resources, coaching, mentorship, just the free time itself. It's not something most people can just stumble into.
You need the opportunity.
You need the opportunity. And Gladwell uses the Beatles as, like, the perfect example.
The Hamburg years.
Exactly. Their time playing in Hamburg, Germany in the early 1960s was absolutely transformative for them.
How so? What was special about Hamburg?
Well, they had these incredibly long residencies, 5 trips between 1960 and late 62. On their very first trip, they played 106 nights.
106 nights.
For at least 5 hours a night. Sometimes much longer, apparently.
5 hours a night. Minimum. That's insane.
It's an unbelievable amount of live performance time. John Lennon even said something like, they had to get good, they had no choice. They were playing their best songs over and over in Liverpool for maybe an hour. In Hamburg, they had to fill 8-hour slots sometimes.
Wow. So they were just forced to play constantly, learn tons of songs, experiment.
Exactly. They had to learn everything, try new things, develop stage presence. It was their crucible. That intense, relentless playing was their 10,000 hours, or a huge chunk of it. It forged them into the band they became.
An opportunity they wouldn't have had just playing local gigs.
No way. And it's not just music. Think about Bill Gates and computers.
Right. Another classic Gladwell example.
What?
It wasn't just that he was smart.
No, it was this incredible, almost unbelievable sequence of opportunities he had with computer technology, starting at a remarkably young age.
What kind of opportunities? We're talking late 60s, early 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Computers weren't exactly common.
Not at all. But in 1968, Lakeside School, the private school Gates went to, somehow they got access to a time-sharing computer terminal. This was incredibly rare, even for universities back then.
A terminal in a high school in 68. How did they even pay for the time?
Well, get this. The Lakeside Mothers Club held fundraisers to pay for the students' computer time.
The Mothers Club, that's amazing.
Isn't it? And the opportunities just kept coming for Gates. When that initial money ran out, it turned out one of his friend's fathers worked at a local company called C-Cubed.
Oh.
And C-Cubed needed people to test their software on weekends. So Gates and his friends got basically unlimited computer time in exchange for debugging.
Wow. So more free access.
Then he found out about another company, ISI, that needed help with payroll software. He started working for them. He also lived near the University of Washington and realized their computer center was usually empty in the very early morning hours, like 3 to 6 a.m., so he'd sneak out and go use their computers.
He was obsessed.
Totally. And then another connection led to a company called TRW needing someone to work on a big software project. It was just one thing after another.
So it was this perfect storm. Right school, right time, these lucky breaks with a C-Cubed, ISI, UW, TRW.
Exactly. That period, basically from 8th grade through high school, that was Bill Gates's Hamburg. It was his period of intense immersion, racking up thousands of hours of programming experience when almost no one else his age had that chance.
It really drives home that point. Talent and hard work are necessary, sure, but these extraordinary opportunities to get those 10,000 hours, they seem crucial.
They're often the silent partners in extraordinary success, yeah.
Okay, so we got birthday giving and early edge, and then the opportunity to accumulate massive practice. What about just being born at the right time in history?
Yeah. That's another huge piece of the puzzle Gladwell explores, the influence of your birth year.
How does that work?
Well, he looks at a list, I think, from around 2008 of the 75 wealthiest people in human history.
Yeah, the richest ever.
And when you look at the Americans on that list, especially the industrialists from the 19th century, something really striking pops out. An incredible number of them were born in a very narrow window of time, basically a single decade, the 1830s.
The 1830s? Seriously? Like who?
Well, think about the huge names.
Yeah.
John D. Rockefeller, born 1839, Andrew Carnegie, 1835, Frederick Weyerhaeuser, Jay Gould, Marshall Field, a whole cluster of them born in that mid-19th century period.
That's uncanny. Why the 1830s? What was so special about being born then in America?
Because that generation came of age, hit their prime working years, right when the American economy was undergoing arguably its biggest transformation ever.
What kind of transformation?
Think about it. The railroads were exploding across the country. Wall Street was becoming the financial engine it is today. Industrial manufacturing was scaling up massively. The entire economic landscape was being rebuilt.
So if you were in your 20s or 30s during, say, the 1860s and 70s.
You were perfectly positioned to ride that wave. The rules were being written, new industries were being created from scratch. It was a moment of unprecedented opportunity for people with vision and drive who were the right age.
So timing was everything.
It seems like it played a massive role. If you were born, say, in the 1810s or 1820s, your mindset and capital were probably tied to the older pre-Civil War economy.
Right.
If you were born later, say in the 1850s or 60s, the initial rules were already set, the groundwork laid by that earlier generation.
You missed the boat, in a way.
Kind of. That 1830s cohort hit the absolute sweet spot. They were undeniably brilliant and ambitious people, but they also benefited enormously from being born at precisely the right historical moment.
Okay, that makes sense for the Industrial Revolution. Does this apply to more recent times, like, say, the tech boom?
Absolutely. Gladwell makes the same argument for the personal computer revolution.
Okay, when was the right time to be born for that?
Well, many people point to January 1975 as a key moment.
Why January 75?
That's when the cover of Popular Electronics magazine featured the Altair 8800.
Ah, the first real personal computer kit. The one hobbyists could actually buy and build.
Exactly. It was the spark. So if that's the starting gun, who was ideally positioned to take advantage?
You'd need to be young enough to, like, embrace this completely new thing, right? Not already locked into an old way of thinking.
Right. Probably not someone born much before, say, 1952. They'd likely be too established in their careers.
Okay. But you also needed to be old enough to actually do something with it, right?
Yeah.
Like, probably out of high school, maybe even college, ready to start a company or dedicate serious time.
Good point. So probably not born much after maybe 1958 or so. Otherwise, you're still too young when the revolution really kicks off in the late 70s and early 80s.
So that leaves, what, roughly 1952 to 1958, a 6 or 7 year window?
That seems to be the sweet spot. And when you look at the birth years of the pioneers,
Let me guess. Bill Gates.
October 28, 1955. Right in the middle.
Big joke.
February 24th, 1955. Same year.
Wow. Any others?
Yep. The founders of Sun Microsystems, Scott McNealy, Vinod Khosla, Andy Bechtolsheim, all born in the mid-1950s. Eric Schmidt, who ran Google, 1955. Steve Ballmer, Microsoft CEO, 1956.
It's uncanny again. It's not proof, obviously, but that concentration is really suggestive.
It really is. It suggests that being brilliant and hardworking wasn't enough. You also had to be born at the right time to catch that specific historical wave. Being born 5 years earlier or 5 years later might have meant missing that window of opportunity.
It really adds another layer to understanding success. It's not just you, it's you in your time.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how much of what we call individual genius is actually about being perfectly synchronized with the historical moment.
Okay, we've hit birth date, opportunity for practice, historical timing.
Huh.
But what about just pure raw intelligence, IQ? Surely that's got to be a massive factor in exceptional success.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? That's the standard assumption. Super high IQ equals super success.
Yeah.
But Gladwell throws a wrench in that with the story of Christopher Langan.
Christopher Langan, I think I've heard of him. Wasn't he on that TV show, 1 versus 100? The guy with the supposedly stratospheric IQ?
That's him. His IQ has been reported as being incredibly high, maybe 195 or even higher, way up there in genius territory.
And his abilities sound, well, almost superhuman. Gladwell mentions him drawing like a photograph at 14.
Yeah, and playing complex Hendrix sitar solos perfectly at 15, reading and summarizing thick college textbooks in just a couple of days. His raw processing power seems undeniable.
Okay, so with that kind of brain power, you'd expect him to be, I don't know, a Nobel laureate, a tech billionaire, running the world.
That would be the expectation based purely on IQ. But Langan's life story has been, well, much more complicated. He's faced a lot of struggles, bounced between jobs, had difficulty navigating academic institutions, and getting his own complex theories published or recognized in mainstream ways.
So the genius-level IQ didn't automatically translate into conventional high-level success.
Not in the way we usually imagine, and his story really forces us to question that simple equation. High IQ equals guaranteed success. There seems to be something else missing, or maybe something else that's just as important.
Okay, so what is that other thing? If it's not just analytical intelligence, what else do you need?
This is where Gladwell brings in the idea of practical intelligence.
Practical intelligence. Okay, what's that?
It's a concept largely developed by psychologist Robert Sternberg, and he defines it as basically knowing what to say to whom, knowing when to say it, and knowing how to say it for maximum effect.
Ah, so it's more like social smarts, street smarts, knowing how to work the system.
Exactly. It's about navigating real-world situations effectively, understanding social cues, persuading people, negotiating, knowing how to get what you want or need from others and institutions. It's know-how.
And how is that different from the intelligence measured by IQ tests?
While IQ tests primarily measure analytical intelligence, your ability to solve abstract problems, logical reasoning, pattern recognition, that sort of thing, Sternberg argues that practical intelligence is distinct from that. They're not necessarily correlated.
You can be brilliant analytically but lack practical smarts, or vice versa.
Precisely. Or you could be high in both, or low in both. Think about Robert Oppenheimer, head of the Manhattan Project. Brilliant physicist, clearly high analytical intelligence, but also, despite some social awkwardness, he was incredibly effective at managing that huge, complex project, dealing with military figures, scientists, politicians. He had practical intelligence, too.
Okay, so where does this practical intelligence come from? If it's not measured by IQ, is it something you learn?
Sternberg argues, and Gladwell emphasizes, that it's largely learned. And crucially, it's often learned implicitly, absorbed from your family environment and upbringing.
Learn from your family. How?
Gladwell uses an anecdote about a young boy, Alex Williams, at a doctor's appointment. Alex is maybe 9, but he's confidently engaging with the doctor, asking follow-up questions, even challenging him politely about his growth chart percentiles.
A 9-year-old doing that? That's pretty assertive.
It is, and the key point Gladwell highlights is that Alex's mother is right there, subtly guiding him, prompting him, having clearly taught him how to interact with authority figures like doctors, how to ask questions, how to state his case, how not to be intimidated.
Ah, so he learned those skills, that confidence, at home.
Exactly. His upbringing fostered what sociologist Annette Leroux calls concerted cultivation. His parents actively nurtured his talents, reasoning skills, and crucially, his ability to negotiate and interact confidently with institutions and authority figures. It instilled a kind of sense of entitlement, not in a negative way, but a feeling that his voice mattered and he had the right to speak up and be heard.
And how does that contrast with other upbringings?
Well, Leroux contrasts it with what she calls the accomplishment of natural growth, often seen in working-class families. There, parents love their kids just as much, but they tend to give more directives, expect obedience, and kids have more unstructured free time. They don't necessarily get the same explicit coaching on how to navigate complex social systems or challenge authority. Gladwell uses another child, Katie Brindle, as an example, bright, but much more differential and less assertive in similar situations.
So that sense of entitlement, learned at home, becomes a form of practical intelligence, a real advantage.
It seems to be a huge advantage, knowing how to talk to teachers to get a grade changed, how to negotiate with a boss for a raise, how to persuade people. These are practical skills often honed in families that practice that concerted cultivation. It really makes you think about social capital, doesn't it?
Yeah. Are schools and workplaces set up in ways that inherently favor people who've learned these specific interaction styles?
That's a really important question, and it brings us back to Chris Langan versus Robert Oppenheimer.
Right. Oppenheimer, despite that weird incident at Cambridge where he apparently tried to poison his tutor.
Yeah, clearly had some issues. But he grew up in a very privileged, stimulating environment in New York. His parents practiced that concerted cultivation. There's a story about him giving a geology presentation to the New York Mineralogical Club when he was only 12.
12 years old, presenting to adult scientists.
Imagine the confidence and skills that built. That's practical intelligence being nurtured. He learned how to operate in those kinds of environments.
Okay, and contrast that with Langan.
Langan had a very difficult, impoverished upbringing. He clearly didn't get that same kind of coaching in navigating the world. So even with his incredible intellect, he struggled to deal with university bureaucracy, to convince professors to get his ideas published. He lacked the credentials, sure, but maybe more importantly, he lacked some of that practical intelligence, that social savvy.
He even admitted finding it hard just to talk to a calculus professor.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It wasn't about not understanding the math. It was about the social interaction, knowing how to approach someone in authority, how to make his case effectively within that system.
So the takeaway is, exceptional analytical intelligence might get you in the door, but you need practical intelligence to really navigate the building and succeed.
That seems to be Gladwell's point. It's about knowing the unspoken rules of the game, and that knowledge is often a product of your upbringing and cultural background, not just your IQ score.
Okay, wow. So pulling all these threads together then, what's the big picture?
The big picture seems to be that extraordinary success is rarely just about the individual pulling themselves up by their bootstraps through sheer talent and grit.
Yeah, that narrative seems a bit too simple now.
It's this really complex interplay of factors. There's the initial advantage, sometimes arbitrary like a birth date.
Right, the Matthew effect kicking things off.
Then there's the crucial role of opportunity, the chance to get those 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, like the Beatles in Hamburg or Bill Gates at Lakeside.
The opportunity that often comes from that initial advantage,
Yeah.
or just lucky circumstances.
Exactly. And then there's the historical context, being born in the right era to catch a wave of change, like the 1830s industrialists or the 1950s tech pioneers.
Being in the right place at the right time on a grand scale.
And finally, there's practical intelligence, the social savvy, often learned from family and culture, that allows you to actually leverage your talents and opportunities effectively, like Oppenheimer versus Langan.
It's like all these things need to align, almost.
It does seem that way. Gladwell talks about outliers having received a gift, but maybe the gift isn't just innate talent. Maybe the gift is the accumulation of all these advantages, the opportunities, the timing, the cultural background that equips you to succeed.
And the strength or awareness to seize those opportunities when they appear.
Yes, that too. It's not deterministic, but these factors heavily shape the probabilities. We saw it with the hockey players, the Beatles, Gates, those successful lawyers like Joe Flom who benefited from shifts in the legal world, even the cultural factors influencing Korean air pilots that Gladwell discusses elsewhere.
It really forces you to look at success differently, not just as a reflection of individual merit, but as emerging from this whole ecosystem of hidden advantages and circumstances.
It does. It makes the story of success much richer, more complex, and maybe a bit less about superhuman individuals and more about circumstances and systems.
So, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. When you think about your own life or the lives of people you admire, what unseen advantages might have played a role?
Yeah, what opportunities, what timing, what cultural legacies, as Gladwell calls them, might have shaped the path? Were there hidden disadvantages too? It's fascinating to consider how much of our trajectory is influenced by factors beyond just our own effort and talent.